if anybody has any questions or answers, I'll gladly entertain either one of them. Anybody got any questions?
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
You know, you're from Eastern Kentucky, you grew up here. How did you overcome a lot of the microaggressions you faced every day?
Let's see. Well, number one, they weren't so micro. I don't know. You know, I think that I've implied the attitudes that were passed on to us by our grandparents and our parents. And of course, they came through, let me give you an illustration. My grandfather told me that he witnessed a lynching in Georgia when he was 12. And I never saw Pop go to church. The only time I saw Pop in church is he was in a casket. And I asked him once when I was about 30, I said, Pop, why you don't go to church? He said, that's the biggest bunch of BS you ever saw. I said, what? He said, when I saw them hang that boy, he knew this boy that they hung in Georgia, and he said, they had those robes on. And he said, and then they pulled them off. We in the bushes looking at them, and 2 or 3 of them belonged to the biggest white church in town. And we used to cut their grass, me and my uncle. And he said, I never went back to church again because he said, if that's the way they treat you and they Christians, what you reckon they would have did to us if they hadn't loved God? You remember Martin Luther King from the Birmingham jail said, hey, what's wrong with y'all? We're supposed to be in this embracing God hath made of one blood all nations of the earth. You know, and so we were taught early on that the resilience to somebody else defining you, you know, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You can call me anything you want to, but that doesn't make me that, you know. So that we learned very early. Another thing, too, about that is that particularly here in the mountains of the South, I think our people knew that there was a process going on in America where working class blacks and whites had always been pitted against each other. For example, the United Mine Workers of America was one of the first integrated unions in the country. It was the UMWA. Remember, for example, in 1921, they were organizing in a place called Blair Mountain in West Virginia. And the way the miners were going to identify themselves from their enemies is that they all put red bandanas around their necks. The black miners, it was 2,000 black miners amongst those 8,000 people. And they had these red bandanas on, and guess what they called each other? Redneck brothers. Now, can you imagine? Those same redneck brothers at some point began to buy into the racism that kept the poor whites and the poor blacks separated. When Martin Luther King held the March on Washington in 1963, it was a march on Washington for economic justice, and he tried to organize people in Appalachia to come along with him. William Barber has been in Eastern Kentucky recently trying to say poor whites and poor blacks and poor brown people should organize together because we all, you know, as someone once wrote, there's no such thing as the boats leaking on your side. You know, we're pretty much in the same boat in this country, y'all. And if we don't figure out a way to cut through our differences, which are much smaller than our similarities, we got people in this country talking about a civil war again. Yes, we do. We have people talking about a civil war in the United States. And so I'm quite concerned for this little girl right here. You know, what kind of world is she going to grow up in? And it has to do with how can we settle into a place where we won't treat each other as though we're enemies. And I don't know how to articulate that in a way that doesn't sound corny. But there's no other place, no other way to put it. And so how did I put up with those microaggressions? One thing that bothers me is that most of us in my generation, we got our values and our attitudes from our grandparents, from our grandmama, who taught us. Did you know nowadays most young people get their values and their attitudes from somewhere on here. They're called social influencers. They influence that child. They inform that child. Social influence. I mean, Facebook is even questioning itself right now. Instagram is having a debate over how young girls define their body images by what they see on these things. So when you get your messages from some of these social influencers, whether your grandmama or your granddaddy, your social influencer, as grandma would say, that person is bat poop crazy. She wouldn't say poop either. That was another Eastern Kentucky expression. Some of our social influencers are bat poop crazy. And so when you watching somebody go, hey, let me see how they're doing it, the language they use, kids start using it. So that when you buy into a certain way of listening to things and reacting to it based upon a significant other who gives you your values, you could get all twisted up over your music. Yeah, you can get all twisted up over who is your influencer. And so the influences used to come from within the family, and these family relationships are always based in the fundamental Christian doctrine that we learned. And nowadays, people are more unchurched than they've ever been in the history of the United States. People do not go for these value lessons anymore, for these teachings, so that when kids wake up Sunday morning and don't go and get regenerated into what are we believing in here? Where does this come from? Why do we think what we think? And so if people are getting those values from, as the expression goes, you get your good habits from your grandmother's knee, but you get your bad habits from some other joint. And kids are at these other joints. Granny has been cut out of the equation. Yeah, and I think that's particularly so in terms of the protocol of race relations, because a lot of microaggressions, I get them all the time. I mean, I walked into a service station in Whitesburg on my way. I drove over here from Cumberland, and I walked in the service station, and this guy says to me, "Where are you preaching at today, buddy?" I want to say, damn. Where? I look like I'm preaching. He hadn't seen a black man on a bow tie in his life. That was his problem. Where are you preaching at? He jumped immediately to a stereotype. And I could have started getting like, how dare you insult me? What do you mean? Do I look like a preacher to you? But I just said, thank you, brother. Let me get my coffee and get on out of here. Sometimes some of the young kids will respond to those microaggressions in a way that just multiplies and gets into a nasty situation that you can best walk away and avoid. I tell my sons all the time, come home tonight. It's best to get home rather than deal with this microaggression in a way that could possibly result in your death over nothing. Over nothing. So yeah, if that's a long, convoluted answer, I don't know any other way to do it.
I fully understand that. And I also wanted to ask you, I seen what you put on the screen about what it pushed you to do the things you're doing, but what was the deciding factor in your life that drove you to become Dr. Turner? Who is Dr. Turner? That's what I want to know.
Well, they used to always say, man, empty pockets can really make you work hard. And I mean, how many of y'all, I don't know who's in the community college, but I can remember so well that when I was 18 and 19, I think many of us realized back then that I'm not going to get a job in the coal mine. My dad doesn't want me to do that anyway. And so I didn't know where I was going, but that stepping out on faith, faith is when you're in a dark room and you got a flashlight and it beams down and you say, oh, I'm going to get on that and ride down there. God ain't going to turn the light off. It's that faith that we had, that we must have. And so part of it was I had seen some hard-working people, and my best role models were my teachers. The teachers in the Lynch-colored school. I mean, God, man, we had this fantastic education. Early on, that constantly made reference to verses out of the Negro National Anthem, lift every voice and sing, you know, we have come over this road where the blood has, you know, we had to learn the Negro National Anthem in the 3rd and 4th grade. And we had to learn The Creation by James Weldon Johnson. So there was constantly these cultural rhythms that just permeated the whole community. And man, when that community gets dissipated, when that community goes away, you know, and so these things didn't happen out of my sense of what I was doing, but it was a community that took care of us and embraced us, and it expected something out of you. It was even to the point when I was coming along where we would actually have teachers say, be a credit to your race, son. That's a hell of a burden. Be a credit to my race, my God. Are you a credit to your race? You know, when you consider the burden that could be on a young black kid when somebody says, Bill, watch what you're doing because you know you represent all of us. Right? I said, I do? Yes. So those pressures were always there because of the kind of stereotyping, you know. And so essentially, I think that one of the things that we might have, not one of the things we might, I have a chapter in my book called School Integration Was Like a Kick in the Head by an Alabama Mule. I actually had, it was a kick in the you-know-what by an Alabama Mule, but the editors wouldn't let that go. Because you know what they did when they integrated the schools? They took all the black teachers and they threw them out. They threw them out. You can't find 10 black teachers in 50 counties in eastern Kentucky. And that little girl that girl would benefit from having teachers from diverse experiences. Because she's going to grow up in a very diverse world. And so one of the things that they did is that they deprofessionalized the black teachers. And so now, for example, when I graduated high school, my high school graduating class has what my mother called some real doctors, medical doctors. Mama used to say, oh, Bill just got a, what he got? Why they call Bill doctor? You know, Mama had no idea about anthropology. That didn't mean a thing to Mama. But my point is that college going rate of blacks went down precipitously. You can't even get kids to go to community colleges no more. I mean, there are more opportunities now, and they're not taking advantage of it. I don't know what the teachers are doing anymore, but I do know the college going rate went down, and given how far I am along on my life's journey, you can imagine what it might be like being 75, and I've seen so many of these things happen with my own eyes. Oh man, look at that. I saw that shift. It shifted. And now I'm seeing the results of that shift. I saw it where when the schools integrated, I was to be the valedictorian of our class. When they integrated, they said my grades from the colored school didn't count. Yeah, they said, well, y'all were down there. I said, okay, we were down there. Our grades didn't count that year they integrated the school. Well, how do you think that made us feel? The next month they told us we weren't going to have a high school prom because they were afraid of race mixing. I was saying, what? Oh, and by the way, you're not going to have a senior trip because we don't want race mixing. Now, I know that doesn't happen anymore, but it was 1965. It was like, wow, we missed out on a lot because the town fathers, mainly men, they decided what they didn't want to see happen. And so, you know, now we're at a point in 2021 where some of that same stuff is washing up on the beach. It's coming back to haunt us. You know, like they say, I saw on Facebook recently where it said, there's some people who are 75 now who stood in schoolhouses because they didn't want black kids to come into school. And now they are standing in schoolhouses because they don't want their grandchildren to be taught that they kept the black kids from coming into the school. These are the same guys who are my age now. And they're old grandpappies. and they're saying, I don't want to see it change, buddy. Where does that take us as a country? You know, as a pluribus, how's it go? E pluribus unum, one for many, or something like that. And that's why America is still an experiment. We're still working on it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Y'all got so quiet, you can hear a gnat pee on cotton.
I heard that. I have a question that, that came to my mind as you were talking about listening to your grandparents versus listening to influencers. And when I think about, even when I'm 42 years old, and even, I mean, I think that when I think about even when I was young, there was a lot more listening to grandparents going on than there is now, and there probably wasn't as much going on as when you were young. And so I just wonder, as an anthropologist and as a person who studied culture, do we have hope? What can we do to counter that? And I'm an educator. I teach here at the college, so what can we do to sort of counter that and to have students and people look critically and look for the good information and not just what's available? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I think I do. I hope that nothing I have said, despite how it might seem so macabre and dreary, gives you the impression that I'm not an industrial strength optimist. I could not leave here tonight if I weren't optimistic. So I'm thinking like my grandmother one time, after listening to her talk about something to this effect. I was asking her, she was in her mid-90s, and it was around the time that Clarence Thomas was being looked at for the Supreme Court, and the chapter in my book on that is called Black Folk Done Lost Their Stuff. Okay, and so I asked Granny about some of these things I saw happening to people, and I said, Granny, what do you think is going to happen? You know, I was probably in my 40s. She said, I just think all y'all going to hell. y'all just going to hell. I said, Lord have mercy, Jesus. And I said, well, Granny, you're 95 years old. How long have you been thinking this? She said, oh, since I was about 10. You know, so every generation looks like it's over. We're not going to get past this. It's a nuclear holocaust. The climate change is going to just burn us all up. And every generation, I'll bet you, going back to the time when people had bows and arrows, had some fear that this is the existential point we're at. So my thought is that every time we get to a place where we think the race crisis is intractable, someone comes along. Someone would say, God intervenes. God figures out a way to say it before they kill each other. Let me do this. But somehow human beings have a goodness with them that somehow gets us to a place where the better minds prevail. And that's what I think is going to happen. How it's going to happen, I don't know. But I have just seen it in my own life. You know, when I mentioned how, man, I saw this at a point in the 1960s when I thought, oh God, this is unbelievable. The 1970s, the political right doing this, the political left doing that. Remember, we saw airplanes hit the World Trade Center. That was a day when I thought, oh my God. January the 6th, 2021 was a transformative day when people actually rushed the United States Capitol. That hasn't happened ever. And then there are people in denial that it happened. And I still say, okay, we will still figure out a way that despite what looks like this intractable political polarization that we have, I have a belief that Americans will solve this, that calmer minds will prevail, that people will find a place that is comfortable for everybody. I really believe that. Don't you? Because if you don't, if you're not optimistic, you will find yourself sweating at night, and waking up going, what are we going to do? But I think when you can get a calmness about it, you know, and do your part. For example, I long ago gave up on some global or nationwide kumbaya where, you know, all whites and blacks gonna embrace each other. I don't worry about that anymore. I'd like to get to know you as an individual though. I bet if you and I went fishing together, you'd say, he ain't that bad after all. I'm very serious. I think things start with individuals. And sometimes with white individuals can live their entire lives and not know anybody but other white people. Black people don't have that privilege. You do not, if you're black in America, you can never not get, but you know, I have a teacher I mentioned on here named John Stevenson. He went out of his way to say, Bill, I think you could do something. I'm gonna help you. So if you're a teacher, sir, this black kid is just sitting over there, don't like, just go talk to him sometime. Any of you that are teachers, just go out of your comfort zone and you'll find, let me tell you what John did to me one time. I wrote a paper for Dr. Stevenson, and I gave it to him, and he gave it back to me, and it was so marked up. I said, oh my Lord. And he said, you know something, Billy? He called me Billy. He said, you know something, Billy? I'm so glad we got a bird cage at home, because I can use this paper. Now, man, you're talking about devastating. I said, whoa, he's supposed to be my friend. He says, that's why I'm grading this paper like this, because the average white liberal would say, well, he can't do much better than this. He's colored boy from Harlan County. And John said, you can do much better than this. And he made me write that paper 7 times. And so I'm thinking, sir, you know, you go out of your way to meet somebody outside of your comfort zone, you know, people that you see here in Hazard. Y'all can have things that will get people together to hold conversations in support of the work that Emily is doing with this community cultural center. So there are many ways that you can get together, and I hope that you will. Invite me back. I always like to come back home anyway. Okay, any more questions before I run out of water here?
Oh, yeah, I got one more. I got a bunch of questions.
Me and you got to go out
A whole other
to.
bottle of water, so.
Huh?
I said, you've got a whole other bottle of
Oh
water.
yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. Let's rock, man. It's just 7 o'clock.
All right, one more question. Want to know, what would you tell a younger version of you now? What would you tell yourself, a younger version of yourself now, about the way things are changing throughout the world?
Well, I would say this. An individual in the modern world needs to keep up with what is happening. You know, a lot of times people, despite all of the news channels, you know, people not keeping up with what's going on. And so I suggest that people keep up with what's going on, and then you'll have to ask yourself, why is that happening? So you know what's happening and why it's happening. And so no matter how young you could be, if you know what's happening and why it's happening, then you can know where it's subject to go. And so you can put yourself in a place like that great hockey player who says, you don't skate to where the hockey puck is, you skate to where it's going. You know, because a lot of times, by the time some people find out what's going on, it's already in the future. You know, it's already happened. So that young people should keep up with trends in the technology. Community college, best place in the world to do those kind of things. So yeah, that's what I would tell a younger version of myself, which I try to do with, you know, I have some adults in my life. My daughter is 50 now. We have a son who's 47 and one who's 40. But then we got these 21-year-old grandchildren and 16-year-olds and 14-year-olds. And so I think that there's some other people in this room, I'm sure they have grandchildren too. And so you need to help guide them a little bit in terms of what they're listening to and what they're drawn into, to try to get them to see, now here's what that's, you know, because how many of us have not questioned how old-fashioned our grandparents were? Because I used to think that my father was the most cantankerous person. You've heard the story from Mark Twain or somebody said, you know, when I was 15, I thought that my granddaddy was the most cantankerous old man in the world. And I went away and I came back when I was 21. And it was amazing how much he had learned in 6 years. You know, because they know these things, these older people, even though you think you're living in new times, it's nothing new. It's nothing new under the sun. Yeah.
Well, I thank you. And,
Okay.
I don't have any more questions, so, all right.
The bookstore.
Hi. So I was curious what your thoughts are in terms of key policies that need to be changed, or thinking about the political landscape.
How dare you? I haven't said anything political all night. Well, I for one would like to see that policy that they wanted to put forward in a new Build Better bill, where community college would be free. Tuition would be free. I also believe that a country with the wealth that is in America should have a more reasonable way to take care of people in terms of health care. It should be free. For example, I grew up with socialized medicine. I know you don't believe that, but I grew up in Lynch, Kentucky. It was owned lock, stock, and barrel by United States Steel, which in 1946, that was the equivalent to Amazon. U.S. Steel was the biggest company in the country. And right over in little bitty Lynch, Kentucky, around here in Perry County, Westmoreland, where that a big coal company in there, they had these hospitals. And they had the Lynch Hospital. It was called the Hospital of Notre Dame in Lynch, Kentucky. And everybody had health care as long as you worked for the company. And your work was permanent until it wasn't. But I argue, I would like to see us not be in a position where somebody can't get off of an addiction because they can't afford it. So I believe that that type of medicine, you know, I think one of the biggest boogaboos they throw at people in the United States, particularly in their politics, I'm sorry you asked me this stuff because I'm going to tell you what I think, okay? I'm going to tell you what I think. At one point it looked to me like America would prefer to elect a president who was qualified as a sociopath because the other guy was a socialist. You remember what they were saying about Bernie? Bernie came out and said, I'm a democratic socialist. Well, the fact of the matter is, y'all, if you look at American history since the Depression, America has combined a kind of Western Europe, Denmark, Sweden type socialism coupled with pure capitalism. Everybody knows that. But they throw these words out at people who don't read and scare them to death. You ask me. That's what I think happens. Because we're in a crisis right now that has a lot to do with people using social media to play on other people's fears, you know, in terms of policies. I mean, we saw where it got us recently. It got us to a place, for example, where there's still some 70 million Americans who are saying that the presidential election was illegitimate. 70 million people. 70 million people. And you know, and one of the things that happens is this. In Texas, where I live right now, these politics have gotten so polarized that they are changing the congressional districts in a manner that will say, if the person that wins isn't the person we want to win, we have some other people who are going to say the election was a fraud. They want to do it in Georgia. So, you know, free elections are the very foundation of American democracy. So if you can get it to a place where people don't believe that the vote was legitimate, and every time the person gets elected isn't the one that they wanted to get elected, how long is this going to go on? So it takes everyday American people to say, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. You know, so I think that a part of the policies that we're see happening every day, they've so overwhelmed us that I think a lot of people just saying, my God, I'm so tired of this. I wish it would go away. And they don't want to be in the political game anymore, as it were. They're just backing off of it. And that's what I think some people want people to do. Because the minute you walk away, as they say, all it takes for tyrants to take over is for good people to walk out of the way. Then the tyrants will step right in the vacuum, and before you know it, we'll be in a place that we won't recognize each other. So yeah, and you know, I've spent a goodly bit of my time in my life, even to the sacrifice of my career and my income, fighting against certain things that I've said, that isn't right. And if you don't take a stand, then you don't deserve the rights of a democracy if you yourself won't sacrifice. If you don't, you know, as I say, may your tongue cleave to the roof of your mouth. Because democracy demands that good people step forward and work. Right?
Back to that hopeful part.
Ma'am?
So let's get back to that hopeful part.
All right. Any more questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Have you heard of a little town in Harlan County called Chevrolet?
Mm-hmm.
Familiar with Chevrolet? That's where, and I'm from Appalachia, so that's where my papa worked some with the mines. He traveled with Blue Diamond, so at one point in time, he was over in Chevrolet, so just thought I'd ask.
You know, when I get back home, I'll send you a video they did on Chevrolet. So wonderful. It's about 20 minutes long. In fact, they've done some on Chevrolet at Apple Shop. Because at the University of Kentucky, for example, they have something called Eastern Kentucky Appalachian Coal Towns. And Chevrolet is, yeah.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you again for coming. You've certainly taught me some things that I was not aware of. It's been very educational.
Thank you. This has been
very
my
much.
pleasure. I look forward to coming back again one of these days.
Yes, we'd
No
love to have
problem.
you.
All right. As I used to say in the old Baptist church, may the Lord watch between me and thee while we absent one from another.
Amen.
Well, thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Say again, thank you for coming.
Hey, man, my pleasure, brother.
I got a lot of questions for you. I got a lot of questions.
I know.
I'll catch up on some other time. I got your cell number. You got mine?
Yeah, I have it, yeah. Hey, man, y'all tell Herbie I said hello.